I've been treated terribly by my mother-in-law and my husband, Andy, for years, so I decided to divorce my husband after 30 years of marriage. I can't live with you anymore. I'm divorcing you. After that, Andy acted quickly. He called his mother, who lives nearby, and explained that I was planning to divorce him. His mother eagerly came over, and both of them started blaming me with smirks on their faces. Have you moved out yet? Hurry up and leave. Usually, it's impossible to decide on a divorce and move out on the same day, but they knew that. They just wanted an excuse to ridicule me. I'll be gone in 30 minutes. But I wasn't going to take it quietly. Well then, please take care of it. Leave it to me. I've already arranged a car, so come this way. As I got into the car, my mother-in-law followed, her eyes wide with surprise. What? What's with this fancy car? I was about to leave these people behind for good. At best, you'll panic and regret it. My name is Julie Tanaka, I'm 50 years old. I married Andy Tanaka in my 20s and had our son, Tim. At that time, Andy asked me to quit my job and focus on housework and raising our child, so I reluctantly retired. I raised my child with love, but from that time, Andy started to grow cold towards me, casting a shadow over my life. Back then, I was just trying to endure the unreasonable treatment and get through each day. Hey, Julie. The entrance is dirty. You're a full-time housewife now, so at least do the housework properly. I'm sorry, I'll clean it right now. Honestly, you can't do anything. What good is a college degree if you can't be useful? My mother-in-law started coming to our house every day, using my staying home as an excuse. Every time, she'd find something to criticize and yell at me. She had been against me having a college degree from the beginning of our marriage, but lately, she kept saying, even with a degree, you can't do anything. But she never offered any help. If you're done there, can you clean in front of our house too? You're so clueless unless I tell you. She even used the fact that her house was nearby to make me do her housework as well. She'd often spot me going shopping and push her own errands onto me. Of course, she never paid me for it. Oh, Tim, you're so cute. When she came over, all she did was fawn over her grandson whimsically. And she never helped with anything difficult. She would only shower him with affection and leave everything else to me. Hey, he's crying. Poor thing, make him stop crying right now. Yes, ma'am. Honestly. What a terrible parent to let a child cry like that. Despite knowing that children cry, my mother-in-law would use any excuse to berate me. Andy did nothing around the house either, and after I quit my job, the burden fell entirely on me. Julie, do you have some time? There's a place where we can leave the kids, so let's have some tea. Sorry, I'm not allowed to go out except for housework. Oh, I see. If you ever need to talk, just let me know. I'll be here. See you later. Because of this lifestyle, I couldn't match my time with my friends, and after turning down their invitations, we naturally grew apart. Tim, what should I do? I'm getting more and more isolated from the world. I loved my child, but everything else was causing me stress. Hey! You haven't taken out the trash yet. It's filthy. Hurry up and do it. Yes, ma'am. Oh, come on. You're so slow. Why did we get such a useless daughter-in-law? Trying to take care of Tim while doing housework left everything half done, and both Andy and my mother-in-law would blame me. To focus on housework during the day, I considered free daycare when Tim turned 3, but my mother-in-law opposed it. Daycare. Are you planning to separate the child from his parents? You're a stay-at-home mom, don't slack off on raising him. She found faults in my housework and childcare, yet had the nerve to say such things. The same person who pushed her work onto me didn't want me to have any ease. Andy had no interest in childcare and, knowing it wouldn't cost money, said, "Do whatever you want," and stopped participating in discussions. I decided to persuade my mother-in-law. Since Tim was an only child, he needed to practice socializing with other children. That was true, so I could stand firm, which seemed to work. I managed to convince her, though she looked displeased and made snide remarks to me. If you're fine with it, go ahead. It's like you're throwing the kid out like he's a nuisance. I would never do that. Seeing Tim make friends and play happily after only interacting with adults reassured me. However, my life was still being monitored by my mother-in-law. Just because the child isn't here doesn't mean you can slack off on housework, she said, coming to check on me every day. If I hadn't finished the housework before she arrived, she'd nitpick everything that wasn't done and get angry, even if I was still in the middle of a task. I was terrified and hated her. Hey, I'm home. Dinner. Welcome back. I'll get it right away. I'm tired. Hurry up. Yes, yes. Andy no longer helped with housework or childcare and instead added to my burden. Hey, we had the same menu last week. Are you slacking off on housework? Well, I cook every day, so sometimes things overlap. Are you talking back to me? Who do you think makes it possible for you to live like this? Andy's yelling, just like my mother-in-law's, echoed in my head. Tim, who had been quietly playing, was so startled that he started crying. Don't make him cry during dinner. You need to discipline him better. It didn't seem like he was talking about his own child. I couldn't believe I had married someone like this. Holding back my frustration, I tried my best to calm the crying Tim. Anyone would be startled by such a loud voice. Could you please speak more softly? Are you saying this is my fault? Don't act so high and mighty just because you're a stay-at-home mom. Without my money, you and the kid wouldn't survive. Be more grateful and respectful. He always talked about money. Moreover, he had separated his salary and the household expenses into different accounts. Although he gave me some money each month for living expenses, it was clearly decreasing year by year. Considering the shopping expenses my mother-in-law forced on me, it was never enough. Even when I explained the situation and said I didn't have enough money, he always grudgingly handed it over. It's your own fault for being lazy. You're wasting too much money. You think you can just spend other people's money however you like. Yet, he never told his mother to stop making me do her shopping. Without that, things would be a bit better. He just blamed me for not refusing her. He didn't want to be the bad guy. And he hated the idea of his money being used for anyone other than himself. I had a strained relationship with my family, so I had nowhere to go back to. And thinking about Tim, I couldn't divorce when we'd need money the most. I told myself I was staying in this marriage for my child's sake, despite the stress. Even after Tim grew up, the harassment continued. My mother-in-law still monitored me, found faults in my housework and shopping, and Andy often didn't come home without notice. Yet, when he did return, he'd suddenly get angry if dinner wasn't ready immediately. You've been a housewife for years, and you can't even handle housework properly? Get your act together. At least let me know if you need dinner. There are days you don't come home, so I can't always have it ready. Don't talk back. That's your job. Who do you think makes the money? At least do that much since you're freeloading. Lately, Andy's complaints had become even worse. Tim, who had grown up witnessing this, observed his father and grandmother with cold eyes. He was kind to me but clearly avoided them and hardly spoke to them. One day, Tim came to me with a serious look on his face. Mom, he's having an affair. What? Tim referred to his father as he when he wasn't around. At first, I gently scolded him, but I had long stopped thinking of Andy as my husband or Tim's father, so I gave up quickly. I saw him with a young woman when I was out with friends. We followed them for a few days and got a lot of evidence. Tim showed me the photos saved on his phone. There were pictures of Andy walking arm in arm with a woman in her 30s, entering a movie theater and restaurant. There were even photos of them entering and leaving a hotel and kissing on the street. Thanks for telling me. But stop doing this. It's dangerous. I decided to gather evidence myself. But with my mother-in-law constantly watching me, I couldn't move freely. I hired a detective and left it to the professionals. I had no love left for Andy, and Tim was already an adult. I started preparing for divorce while collecting evidence of Andy's affair. "Honey, I have something important to talk about." With enough evidence gathered, I confronted Andy. He flew into a rage and yelled at me. "You act like I'm the bad guy. It's only natural I'd cheat on a shabby old woman like you. How could I see you as a woman?" Andy clearly wasn't going to admit his fault. Then he said his usual line. "Who do you think has been supporting you all this time? Don't act high and mighty. You have no place to go, so know your place." Are you serious? I had suffered so much abuse. I had long stopped loving him and even hated him, but I was still shocked by how deep this went. It wasn't just hate, it was disgust. The man screaming in front of me looked so filthy. "Serious? Of course. If I divorce you, you'd be on the streets. You better keep me happy and behave so I don't divorce you." Hearing Andy's words, my last thread of patience snapped. "I can't live with you anymore. I'm divorcing you." "What?" Andy was initially surprised, but quickly regained his composure. He looked down at me with a malicious grin. "Fine. Do whatever you want." Andy acted quickly after that. He called his mother, who lived nearby, and told her I was planning to divorce him. His mother eagerly came over, and both of them started to blame me with smirks on their faces. "So, you're finally getting a divorce. A useless wife like you is a nuisance, so it's a relief you're leaving. I don't care if you end up on the streets. Once we're divorced, we're strangers. Don't count on my money. I'm sick of seeing your miserable face. Get out." I looked at them coldly and started packing my things. Since I had started packing little by little after learning about Andy's affair, I could leave immediately. Don't even think about seeing Tim. He's our grandson and will take over the house and take care of us in our old age. You can live alone and miserable. They laughed maliciously. Looking back, my life had always been belittled by them. What joy could they find in attacking someone like this? I'd never understand. "Have you moved out yet? Hurry up and leave." Usually, deciding to divorce and moving out on the same day is impossible, but they knew that. They just wanted a reason to mock me. But I wasn't going to take it quietly. "I'll be gone in 30 minutes. Having been treated this way, I couldn't leave without some form of retaliation. Including everything up to now, I decided on my revenge. I had few personal belongings in this house. If I had accumulated more, both Andy and my mother-in-law would have gotten angry, which made moving out very smooth this time. Still, it was tough to carry everything on my own, so I arranged for transport. When I called, 2 cars arrived immediately. "Well then, please take care of it. Leave it to us. We've also arranged a car for you, so please come this way." They had arranged a separate car for me, making the move very smooth. I had never used such a service before, but with such courteous service, I thought I might use it again. As I was about to get into the car, my mother-in-law chased after me, her eyes wide with surprise. "What? What's with this fancy car?" Hearing her shriek, Andy hurried to the entrance, looking flustered. "What? Hey, Julie. What's going on? Explain." They were both furious, their faces red. They might have misunderstood something. Since it seemed like it would take a while, I asked the driver to wait. Then I turned to the 2 unreasonable people. "What's going on?" "I called a car. I'm moving out, so it's only natural. I have luggage too." "That's not it. Why are you riding in such a fancy car? Where did you get the money? You didn't steal from us, did you?" How could I have stolen money when they hardly gave me any? I wished they'd think more realistically. Don't say such terrible things. It's money I earned myself. 10 years ago, Tim suggested I become an online French conversation tutor. I majored in French at university, so that came in handy. I also did interpreting and translating work, but the French conversation classes were more successful than I expected, and now I have my own company. You earned it yourself? Don't be ridiculous. What job could you do without leaving the house? That's right. You must have stolen our money. Give it back right now. They couldn't understand the concept of working online. It was ridiculously outdated, but perhaps that's just how it was for them. Since it was a field they would never be involved in, they had no knowledge of it. My mother-in-law, quick to jump to conclusions, grabbed me, trying to fit me into her narrow-minded logic. Andy turned red with anger, looking like he might start stomping his feet. It was only a matter of time before they both grabbed me. While the driver looked confused, Tim got out of the back seat and raised his voice. What Mom is saying is true. She succeeded in the job I introduced her to, and now she's richer than you, Dad. I'm proud of her. My mother-in-law was shocked by her grandson's unexpected appearance. She stopped grabbing me and turned to Tim. Tim. What are you saying? You're not taking her side just because she's your mother, are you? Andy still couldn't believe it and decided to accuse Tim of lying. Don't lie, Tim. You're just influenced by your mother. Get inside the house now. Despite their shrill voices, Tim showed no signs of backing down. As his mother, I was proud of how much he had grown. No, I'm not going inside. I'm not going back to that house. I'm leaving with Mom. Tim declared firmly. Even after becoming an adult, he hadn't been allowed to leave home. As my mother-in-law accidentally let slip earlier, their plan was to have him take care of them in their old age. Tim, who could have left any time, had stayed because he was worried about leaving me alone in that suffocating house. But now, he didn't have to do that anymore. With me leaving, Tim could finally be free. What did you say? How could you forget everything we've done for you and say something like that? That's right, Tim. Apologize. Mom raised me. Not you. You were never there for me. You only ever used me for your convenience. As if he had never been compliant, Tim stood his ground firmly. It must have been an unexpected turn of events. My mother-in-law turned pale. How could you say such terrible things? You got to go to college because of me. How can you talk like that? Tim's gaze at Andy was ice cold. All you ever talk about is money, Dad. And by the way, it was Mom's money that paid for my education after a while. What? Andy shot me a glance. Since you always acted so high and mighty, saying things like, who do you think is supporting you? I got fed up thinking you'd say that to our son eventually. So, when my work started taking off, I paid for Tim's education myself. You didn't even notice. I had also been covering the shortfall in living expenses with my earnings. Andy genuinely seemed clueless, so I let out a deep sigh. Tim mirrored my expression, looking thoroughly exasperated. There's no way the expenses from kindergarten to college would be nearly the same. You deposited just enough into the household account, making Mom beg for more. Honestly, I don't want to believe we're related by blood. How dare you speak to your parents like that? Tim, who had been calm until now, glared at Andy with a fiery intensity. Then he shouted in an unbelievably low voice. My only parent is Mom. Tim's sudden outburst made Andy flinch. He hadn't expected to be yelled back at. My mother-in-law was also too scared to speak. They only acted tough because they thought we wouldn't fight back. They only attacked those they perceived as weak. What despicable, small-minded people. I only called you Dad and Grandma for convenience, to avoid you taking out your frustration on Mom. But you two are nothing but strangers. A man who pinched pennies and tormented Mom, and a woman who whimsically coddled me and acted like she was my mother. Tim's sharp glare silenced Andy and my mother-in-law's attempts to argue. I had never seen Tim this angry. Despite acting like a mother, you only coddled me when it suited you. I have no memory of you actually taking care of me. Being dragged out by you since I was little was a torture. You always imposed your own convenience and opinions. I'm not an accessory for you to show off. My mother-in-law let out a small scream under Tim's fierce glare. Since he was little, Tim had been taken by her to public places, where she acted like a good grandmother. She would buy him a toy, give him a cheap balloon, and get angry if he didn't play with it. Then she'd loudly complain that I took the toys she bought him. When Tim was in high school, she took him shopping, bought clothes that didn't suit his taste, and got angry when he didn't wear them. Then you'd badmouth Mom to my face to show off. To me, you've always been the villain who made Mom cry. You say I should take over the house and take care of you in your old age, but I don't care. Tim spat the words out. My mother-in-law opened her mouth to say something but wilted under Tim's glare. Andy, instead, responded hesitantly. You ungrateful. I don't remember raising you like that. Gratitude? Tim laughed derisively. I owe you nothing. When I was sick as a child, it was Mom who stayed by my side and took care of me. All she did was poke an apple slice in my mouth and leave. She didn't even check my temperature or care about medicine. The accused woman shrank and mumbled excuses, but I couldn't hear her. Neither could Tim, probably. She couldn't argue because Tim was speaking the truth. And as for you, Tim continued, glaring at Andy, you never cared about me. You only meddled in my college and career choices. You didn't care about anything else. You didn't even bother to learn about my achievements. It was obvious you used any non-first place ranking to blame Mom. You never actually cared about my grades. Tim's eyes were filled with anger. Andy and my mother-in-law trembled under his gaze. They had only insulted me from a safe distance, thinking I wouldn't fight back. They had never faced someone as openly angry as Tim before. The consequences of their small-mindedness had finally caught up with them. But I didn't want to see my son consumed by anger. I walked over to Tim and gently patted his shoulder. Calm down a bit. Realizing he had lost his cool, he took a deep breath and managed to control his emotions. Well, Tim and I are leaving. I run in French conversation school now, and we can live just fine on our own. Andy glanced at the car I had called. He seemed to realize that Tim and I were telling the truth. His demeanor changed completely, and he approached me with a sycophantic smile. Wait, can't we reconsider? I was wrong, let's not get divorced. What are you talking about? You already have a girlfriend. Why don't you go and be happy with her? My words shocked my mother-in-law the most. A girlfriend? What's going on, Andy? Andy, caught off guard, looked between me and his mother in a panic and began to stammer out excuses. No, it's not true. She's lying. Trying to deny it, huh? We have all the evidence, texts, photos, everything. You can't talk your way out of this. Tim pulled out the evidence he had gathered, along with what the private investigator had found. It was all neatly compiled into photos. Since they were copies, there was no point in trying to destroy them. I looked at Andy, who was now sweating profusely, with a cold stare. Your girlfriend, Millie, wasn't she? She's a young and pretty one, isn't she? I've been in touch with her husband. We're both planning to file for alimony, so good luck with that. Alimony! Andy's face went from blue to ashen. Seeing his reaction gave me a bit of satisfaction. Tim remained calm and continued to hammer the reality into Andy. You neglected your wife and went after another woman. This is what you get. Or did you not think about it at all? Tim's eyes were full of disdain. I couldn't help but be impressed. I thought I couldn't despise Andy anymore, but he had managed to surprise me. I hadn't expected anything from him, but he had surpassed my lowest expectations. You got quite cocky after I stopped asking for living expenses. You spent most of your salary right away, didn't you? The living expenses you provided kept dwindling. Did he think I was frugal because I was scared of his reprimands? No, he had lost his sense of money and self-control, indulging his desires. It's shocking that you didn't realize Mom was covering almost all the living expenses. The account for household expenses had no money. I deposited the necessary amount each month, and it would be gone just as quickly.
Andy, what does she mean by alimony? How much money do we have left?
My mother-in-law rushed over to Andy and began questioning him. It was so fitting for her to be concerned about money first, even after learning about her son's infidelity. Andy scowled, then roughly shook off his mother's hand.
Shut up. It's fine. We have my retirement money, we're not completely broke.
I hope you can pay the alimony with that. I didn't know how much was left in Andy's salary account, but judging by his lavish spending on his affair, it probably wasn't much. My words seemed to hit the mark as Andy, who had been shrinking back, glared at me with hatred. I exaggeratedly shrugged. Oh, scary. Even if you glare, you'll still have to pay the alimony. There's no money coming from anywhere else. If he had been more prudent, things wouldn't have come to this. At least, if he hadn't had the affair, the alimony would have been more manageable. Actually, I'm planning to add the amount you didn't provide for living expenses to the alimony, so be prepared. I had kept evidence of covering almost all the living expenses since my earnings had started to increase. I had consulted with a lawyer about our household matters and had been preparing. Unlike Andy, who had spent his time carelessly, I had been thinking ahead. When my mother-in-law realized her son had no money, she turned to us with a sycophantic smile. Unlike Andy, who had tried to suck up to me, she approached Tim with a sweet tone.
Wait, Tim. Are you really leaving? Are you going to abandon me? Please, help me out of pity.
Tears welled up in her eyes as she pitifully tried to act sorrowful. Despite hearing everything Tim had said, how could she think he would extend a helping hand to her? Couldn't she see that he felt nothing but contempt for her? Her world revolved around herself, which allowed her to be so shameless. Her thinking was so conveniently self-serving, it was just despicable. Tim glared at my mother-in-law with hatred. You always got in the way whenever I tried to be with Mom, even when I was in kindergarten. My mother-in-law's face froze. She seemed to be searching for an excuse, but Tim didn't give her a chance, his eyes cold. And you always said, poor Tim, your mother can't cook, or Tim got sick because your mother can't clean, always bad-mouthing Mom so I'd hate her. Hearing Tim's words brought back my own memories. She used to say these things loudly on purpose, so I could hear. I had thought she was a terrible person, but seeing her confronted by her grandson left her expression frozen. She had never considered how her actions affected me or Tim, who she claimed to pity. She only thought about making herself feel better. That was the kind of selfish person she was.
I'm not pitiful, and Mom is great at cooking and cleaning. You made her do your housework and did nothing yourself. If you think I'm abandoning you now, I already abandoned you when you started bad-mouthing Mom to me.
Hearing her grandson's clear disgust, my mother-in-law collapsed to the floor. Andy, who had always been considerate only to her, was still muttering about his money. Selfish people, in the end, only see themselves. Tim and I ignored them as we got into the hired car.
So, make sure to pay the alimony. And don't ever contact us again.
There was no response from them. As the car started, I didn't look back at the place where I'd suffered for so many years. Andy ended up losing a lot of money, having to pay alimony to both me and his mistress's husband. We also received the alimony from Millie, Andy's affair partner, which was a relief. They divorced as well. Unlike us, they didn't have children, which was their small consolation. I heard my mother-in-law's health declined after that. She rarely goes out now and is almost bedridden during the day. Originally someone who thrived on belittling others, she forces herself out on good days but only talks badly about Tim and me. People have grown tired of it and are distancing themselves from her. Even Andy is tired of dealing with her, so she must be quite unbearable now. Eventually, she'll have no one left to complain to. I hope she spends her final years in loneliness. Andy had an affair with a colleague, and now both are shunned at work. When his mistress found out Andy had no money, she quickly left him and quit her job to find another. Andy, with no savings, will have to keep working in disgrace. His only family, my mother-in-law, is a constant source of complaints, and with no money and no one to care for him, he'll likely lead a lonely life too. I'm eager to see who ends up more destitute, them or me. Tim and I moved into an apartment. I considered buying a house, but with Tim about to become independent, an apartment seemed more practical.
Mom, I have someone I want you to meet.
Oh, does that mean? 6 months after the divorce, Tim introduced me to his girlfriend. She was kind and wanted to get along with me.
You've been through a lot, Mom. I want you to be as happy as possible from now on. I'm glad to have such a kind mother-in-law. I'm clumsy, but I respect you, so please teach me many things.
With tears in my eyes, I nodded at their words. After all the hardships, it felt like a wave of happiness had finally arrived. From now on, my life would surely be filled with